Hi, we're at week 3, session 8, scheduling resources. Just to point before I start going through these slides, I've just for the last 40 minutes or so just sat in my room and talked to myself because I've just gone to pre-record this session, gone through the 37 or so slides, completed it, thought great, closed the presentation down and realised I hadn't pressed the record button. So this is version 2 of my pre-recording. Hopefully, I actually quite liked the first attempt, so hopefully this attempt will be better. So that'll teach me, won't it? You know, make sure you press the record button first. But we're going to look at scheduling resources for this session. Hopefully you've found session 7 okay. Slightly trickier than the previous 2 worksheets on Microsoft Project, and the purpose is now for you to get to refer back to previous material and practice. Practice makes perfect, as they say, and hopefully you've managed to design a project for a football stadium and you're getting familiar now with the features and functions of Microsoft Project. Following this presentation, I'm not going to do another presentation with you this week. I've got a slightly tougher for session 9 Microsoft challenge for the UK Space Agency. Now, I don't expect everyone to be up to speed by the time you get to this worksheet, but again, it's a stretch and challenge activity for the more capable Microsoft Project users. So please give it your best shot, and hopefully, you know, when we come to our Zoom sessions, you'll be able to show me how well you're getting on. You may have seen on the Blackboard page a Padlet board now. So Padlet is the alternative I'm going to recommend we use this week and possibly for future sessions instead of the journal. We've got, unfortunately, a few glitches, aren't we, with potential work laptops and problems using that tool. So Padlet is an alternative tool, and what you can do on Padlet, you can actually upload attachments, photographs. In the past, I've had students that have you know, used to use a plain piece of paper and a pen and made some handwritten notes and then taken a photo of, and I like it. So during the Zoom session, I'll give you a quick whistle-stop tour on how to use the program. But what I'd like you to do after the 3 sessions this week is upload all your material on there. That way I can check for progress and you can ask any questions. You can also see how well your peers are doing as well. I am a big believer in peer assessing and working together. And it's good to hear, I was speaking to one or two of you last week about, you know, that when you were stuck on a few things, you've kind of helped each other along, and that's what it's all about. And we can all get to week 6 happily, and hopefully you'll all do well in your assessments. Remember, end of week 4 is your first assessment, so we've got 1 more week after this to practice project and get the understanding of the theory, and then you have a go at your first assessment, which is a task using Microsoft Project. So, you know, the session 7 prior and future sessions hopefully will prepare you for that. So, learning objectives. We're going to describe the problems of resource scheduling. We're going to explain the concepts of resource smoothing and leveling. And we're going to explain the benefits of resource scheduling. And finally, we're going to take some, again, we've already had 1 go at this today, but what I want you to try and do is look at the session 9, which is looking a little bit at smoothing and leveling within Microsoft Project. And it's quite straightforward in Microsoft Project. There's a lot of little features and graphics that can help you. In the real world, if you were drawing a Gantt chart on a piece of paper, leveling and smoothing a little bit more challenging. So we'll get some more practice at doing that. Okay, so your first real point of discussion, and I'm going to suggest that you use the Padlet board here, and I actually post, we can use it almost like a chat room or a forum, so it'll be a good test of the Padlet board. So good time to do a strategic pause, but project times do not become a schedule until resources have been assigned. Do you agree with this statement? So have a little think about this one, and then what I'd like you to do is share your opinion and try and back it up with a little bit there. Don't just say yes or no. That's the lazy student way, but try and justify it. Come up with a sort of reason why you agree or disagree. So that's your first task out of this session. And again, you could watch the presentation in full and then go back and do these activities, or if you want to hit the pause button, by all means, that's your first task. Okay, question for you. So what is a project constraint? And as you can see, there's a notepad and pen there. I'd like you to tell me in your own words what is a project constraint And again, this could go onto the Padlet board if you choose. You can write it on a notepad and pen and photograph it or type it. It's entirely up to yourself. Or even if you find a hyperlink. Some of my students in the past, rather than write it, they've actually gone and done a bit of Googling. They've found a really good, sometimes it's even Wikipedia. They find an article that explains it really well and they include the hyperlink. And then, by sharing that hyperlink with each other, again, it's a good way of learning. So I'm assuming you've hit the pause button, you've had a go, and you've come back to me. So I'm going to give you a definition of a project constraint. So the PMI, which obviously is a professional body, like the APM, say it's a limiting factor that affects the execution of a project, program, portfolio, or process. I quite like that. Have you found something similar? Okay, so the resource constraint definition refers to the limitations of inputs available to complete a particular job. Every project you accept will require some combination of time and resource. And examples are, for example, time, resource. It could be the availability of people, the availability of equipment, supplies, venues, or assets. It could be the budget. It could be regulatory or legislative requirements. It could be policy or governance, or it could be managing the stakeholder needs. And obviously managing your stakeholders is critical. I've tried to put an example in there. So let's say the scope of the project is to paint 3 rooms in one day. But you know yourself from experience, and if you're doing your estimates, we talked about estimates last week, didn't we? That one room will take 1 day and you've only got 1 painter and decorator. So quite clearly 2 rooms aren't going to get painted. So you need to make some decisions as a project manager. What do? Do you go back to the stakeholders and say, I'm sorry, it's going to take an extra 2 days? Or do you employ 2 additional painter and decorators? Or do you just agree to do 1 room and leave the other 2? Again, that's managing the stakeholders, managing their needs and ensuring that you do the best you can with what you've got available. So, the need for consideration of resources. You ask yourself these questions. Do we have access to the adequate level of equipment and our materials? So it may be that we need a crane for a particular job. Is it available? Will outside contractors have to be used? Are the resources available when we want them? And are there resources dependencies? So you've probably already noticed with your practice the previous 2 weeks using Microsoft Project that there is different types of resources. And this slide just basically illustrates again that there's 3 types: people, material and equipment. The APM specifies it as 2 categories: consumable and reusable. And within Microsoft Project, I'm hoping you've all seen this now. When you go to your resource sheet view, you've got 3 types of resources that you can allocate. So you've got the work, material and cost. So the APM in 2012 in their 6th edition of the Body of Knowledge state that resource scheduling is a collection of techniques used to calculate the resources required to deliver the work and when they will be required. And resource scheduling aims to ensure 1. Confidence that the schedule is realistic. 2. Early identification of resource capacity and bottlenecks and conflicts. And 3. Efficient and effective utilisation. And it's a 3-step process. So step 1 is what's called allocation. So you estimate the amount of effort for each task and the resources required to undertake it. The next one is aggregation, and you summarise the resources using a resource histogram to show the amount of required for any period of time and by resource type or role if necessary. And the third one is scheduling, where again you use the resource profiles, the histograms, and resolve any conflicts of either by either resource smoothing or levelling, depending on where there is a constraint on time or resource availability. And we're going to talk a little bit about smoothing and levelling shortly. So, classification of a scheduling problem. A time-constrained project is the completion time is fixed, but resource is flexible. A resource-constrained project, resources are fixed, but completion time is flexible. So this graphic on the right hand side shows a typical problem. So we've got a resource distribution in two different planning types. We've got across the bottom axis we've got time, week 1 to 6, and on the other axis we've got the number of required mechanical engineers from 0 to 14. And as you can see, the actual number of required engineers is actually fluctuating week by week. So in week 3 and week 5 we clearly, and at the start of week 1, we need more engineers than we're doing weeks 2 and 4 and 6. So you've got two possible problems. So first one is that the resource is inefficiently utilised, and the second one is your resource is over-allocated. You may have seen on your Microsoft project, depending on what stage you're at in your development, that if you over-allocate somebody, so if you use somebody twice, so example being, we'll go back to our painter and decorator, let's say this particular project, we need to dig a trench and paint a wall at the same time. Now, we all are encouraged to multitask, aren't we? But it's impossible for you to have a spade in your hand digging and have a paintbrush in hand painting a room professionally. So you would need two people to do that. You can't expect the same person to do the same job at the same time, or two different jobs at the same time. And on Microsoft Project, you do see those cute little red figures appear on the left-hand side if you do apply the same resource or too much resource to the same tasks, etc. And you'll come across that, and some of the challenges that you have in the later Microsoft Project tasks that I'm going to give you will be all about sorting out those issues. Okay, so there is tools and techniques used in my project management to overcome these issues. One is called resource levelling and one is called resource smoothing. And it rarely happens that you have all resources as per your schedule to complete the project. Even if you have them during project execution, any risk can take away that freedom and you have to manage with few resources. So for example, somebody might go off on the sick, they may be required elsewhere. Sometimes in an ideal world, you know, your plan goes from start to finish, but realistically you do have issues in the execution of your project. So even when you have all the necessary resources, as the project manager, it is your responsibility to use the resources efficiently and save costs for the company. So you need to be able to look at your available resource and make sure that when you schedule everything, that you're as efficient and effective as possible. You don't want Barry and Trev sitting around all day getting paid a full day's shift, but they're only doing 2 hours work. You know, it'll be seriously frowned upon by your financial directors. And I have worked in organisations. I can remember I was working on a shutdown, and we had some contractors in doing some rigging, and there was 4 or 5 of this particular team were backwards and forwards, up and down this plant working, and they had a crane driver that slept for about 7 of the 8 hours that he was on site, picking up a fairly good wage. The actual hire of the crane was on a daily basis, so you can imagine you've paid all that money for a crane and a crane driver and probably only used it for maybe half an hour of a 8-hour shift. So, you know, it's all about managing your resources as effective and efficiently as possible. And if you had that scenario on every task and every dependency, you know, your project's going to run longer than it would have, or it should, but it's also going to cost you more as well because you're paying for resource that you're not using. So to achieve these objectives, you use what's called resource optimization techniques. 2 such resource optimization techniques are as follows. The one is what's called resource levelling, and one is called resource smoothing. And these techniques allow you to complete the project with minimal obstruction. So I don't know what prior knowledge you have of resource scheduling and resource levelling. So this is an opportunity for potentially a strategic pause. So I'm going to ask you the question, what is resource levelling and how does this differ from resource smoothing? And what I'd like you to do is maybe pause the video and have a little look yourself, put down a few notes You may even want to do a mind map and sketch something and come up with some suggestions. And once again, it'd be nice to see this information on the Padlet board if possible, or at the very least you keep a record of it just so you get your head around it. And then resource levelling, resource smoothing just takes a little bit of time to get your head around. It's not something that you pick up straight away, so you may read a couple of different articles, maybe look at a couple of YouTube videos and go from there. Okay, so one particular really useful explanation, and I'm going to use Dr. Mike Clayton again. As you saw last week, I used a couple of his videos, which I think are really, really good at explaining things. This is a very short whistle-stop tour of resource levelling and smoothing. I've actually copied this onto Blackboard as well. There may be others out there. Again, if you find a better one, please share it with me, because it's always good to find resources that help explain things.
In this video, I want to answer the question, what is resource levelling? And how does it differ from resource smoothing? Resource levelling is the process we use to resolve resourcing conflicts when we don't have sufficient resource and we would need to over-allocate resources in order to get the work done in the time that an aspect of the project is scheduled. Of course, in the real pragmatic world of projects, sometimes we do and can expect our people to work a few extra hours over the course of a week or two. But it's not good practice to expect that of people, and it certainly isn't sustainable over long periods of time. So if you find that your resources would need over a period of time to be working significantly more hours than they have available, you need to do some resource levelling. The principles of resource levelling are about fair and efficient allocation of the work. And there are a number of ways that we can level our resources in a project. We can delay start times, or we can extend the planned duration of some of our tasks. We can remove some of those tasks, or we could allocate additional resources, new people, to add to the resource team. We can split tasks up, or we could bring tasks forward so that they can be done before the crunch period when our resources would be over-allocated. And finally, rather than assigning additional resources, we could assign alternative resources where we have the potential to use more skilled, more expert, and therefore more effective people onto the task. Of course, in a project, it's always useful to have new people doing new tasks, learning new skills. But when you're over-allocating those because they have too much learning time, bringing in more experienced, more expert resources can be a solution. So how does resource levelling differ from resource smoothing? Well, resource smoothing is more about balancing up the peaks and troughs in the demand for each individual resource. If you're asking me to do 20 hours of work in the next 3 days and then 4 hours of work in the following 2 days, then you can balance those out, and that's what we mean by resource smoothing. So you can think of resource smoothing as being largely about managing time constraints on your project with your resources, whereas resource levelling is more about managing constraints around those resources. The differences, I do understand, are subtle, and they often get confused, not least because, of course, on a real project we often need to do resource levelling and resource smoothing at the same time. Most sophisticated project management, project planning tools have resource levelling built in. And what these tools do is they use sophisticated algorithms to automatically calculate ways that you can level and smooth the resources across your project. Personally, I prefer not to use them unless I have to. I prefer to use a linear responsibility chart as a way to represent and understand the resourcing of my project over a fixed period of time. And then where I find resources are over allocated and I need to level those resources, I can do that manually by shifting resources from one task to another, by allocating new people to specific tasks. However, that's time consuming and complex. So when would you use automated algorithmic resource leveling on the one hand, and when would you do it manually on the other? For algorithmic resource leveling, you need to start with a clearly defined set of skills that you can allocate to team members. Each team member can have multiple skills, but you do need a limited defined set of those skills that you can allocate. And you also need to be able to define very clearly what skills are needed for each task. If you can't do that, then you can't specify the work that the algorithms need to do. And I would say that automated resource smoothing is ideal when you have large numbers of tasks and large numbers of resources that would make it complex at best to do it by hand. However, manual resource leveling and resource smoothing as well is ideal where it is hard to articulate clear skills, clear requirements for each of the tasks, but you've got those in your head. The tasks need complicated sets of skills, and each of your people has a wide range of different skills that you understand fully but can't articulate clearly very easily. And of course, manual resource leveling is more tractable when you've got smaller number of resources, and therefore you can readily do it by hand. But whether you do your resource leveling automatically using an algorithm or manually by inspection, we use resource leveling to handle resource constraints on our projects when our people would otherwise be over allocated and required to work too many hours in a day.
Yeah, nice introduction there to resource leveling and smoothing. There is a worksheet or information sheet, not worksheet, I've attached to Blackboard that's underneath this presentation for you to read through if it help clear and get your head round resource leveling and smoothing. I have a couple of slides, hopefully it will help explain things in a simplified version. So time constrained projects, we use what's called resource smoothing. And smoothing resources is about increasing efficiency. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, you're not having people sat around costing money and time. It's about making sure that you're efficient. It is usually used in scheduled time constraint projects, and the three goals of resource smoothing are: 1, to reduce the peak of demand for the resource; 2, reduce resources over the life of the project; and 3, reduce the fluctuations in resource demand. And resource smoothing, you can use resource smoothing when you have to optimise the resources and you cannot extend the schedule. And you can probably just see on the diagram at the bottom there, we've got 6 weeks to deliver this project. We cannot change the length of that time. We've got to be as efficient as we can within those 40 hours per week. So since you cannot extend the schedule, the project completion dates and the critical path will stay the same. Here the activities cannot be delayed more than their total and free float. Using float in this technique will cause you to lose some flexibility from your path. However, the schedule will be optimised, efficient and cost effective, and that's always good to go back to the financial directors and your project sponsor and your stakeholders and explain to them that your scheduling is optimised, efficient and effective. So in resource smoothing, you must be careful to avoid any delay in activity, as this may affect your critical path. Time is the main constraint here. If you have a fixed schedule and are asked to optimise resources. And a good real world example, and again I troll the internet to try and find some examples in its most simple form, and probably a good one is, let's say you're studying a course and you've got an exam at the end, and you've allocated 60 hours of study over a 3-month period, which translates to about 20 hours per month. However, while scheduling the date for the exam, you find that the only available appointment for the exam itself, it's only like commercial courses where you book your exam at the end. The next available appointment for your exam is in 4 months' time. So now what you've got the option is now you can distribute those 60 hours over 4 months rather than 3 months. So you can do 15 hours per month instead of the 20 hours. Okay. So this is an example of what's called resource smoothing. Since you have enough time, there's no need to use all the 60 hours in 3 months. In some cases, you don't really want to study heavily and then have a break, do you? You want to be doing it as you go along, which would probably be better as well. So you can ease the burden of the 3 months and use the 4th month as well. So a different type of constraint is a resource constraint, and for that we need to use what's called resource levelling. And this is where you use the resource levelling when you have limited resources and you may extend the schedule. So it may well be that somebody that you need to do a particular job isn't available. So in this case we've got 5 weeks, and we need to extend the project by a week to ensure that we get the resource. So resource levelling is used when a critical resource may not be available for a certain duration. A critical resource may not be available at a certain point in time, and you have to share resource with another project. So it may well be that we don't all necessarily always have the resource available all the time. We may work in an organisation that's using or running multiple projects, and it's just a case of when that person's available or that object or whatever it is, resource is available. And the final one is the demand for a resource exceeds the supply. So you can use this technique when you must keep some resource usage at a constant level. In resource levelling, you are asked to optimise the limited resources given to you, and here the schedule is not fixed. So resource levelling answers the question of when you will be able to complete the project with the given resources. So an example I found for this one is, let's say you are on a construction project. Construction's used quite a lot in project management, for examples, and we're constructing a 2-storey building. So to construct the first floor we have enough scaffolding, but for the second floor we need extra scaffolding. Okay, so you look within your organisation and you find out you can arrange extra scaffolding from another project, but 1 week later than you require. So you've got a couple of options. One option is you go and find a subcontractor perhaps, or a leasing company, and you lease additional scaffolding, but you probably need additional scaffolders as well, so you may outsource it. Again, that has a cost implication on the project. Or the alternative is to delay construction activities on the second floor by a week. You could possibly get those construction workers working elsewhere during that week while you wait for that scaffolding to become available, and that way you try to be as efficient as possible. And yes, you might argue that your project's going to take a week longer, but it might not actually cost you any more, or in comparison to bringing a contract firm in, the costs can be balanced. So this is an example of what's called resource levelling, where you extend the schedule to get the resource. So I like this graphic. This is a very simplified comparison between smoothing and resource levelling. If you go into the professional qualification world, the APM world, they may ask you a type of question on the comparisons or the differences between smoothing and levelling. So smoothing and levelling in resource optimization. Using smoothing, the critical path will remain constant throughout the process. Optimization of all resources may not be done, and the duration of the project does not increase. However, resource levelling, the critical path of the project will alter, optimization of all resources, and the duration of the project increases. So, how do we do this, or how do I do this? So, resource smoothing or levelling can be done by 1. Delaying the start of certain activities, 2. Extending the duration of certain activities and so reducing the demand for the resources over the duration of the activity, 3. Splitting certain activities if it's possible. And as you see in that graphic there, just an example of what you can do. So an example here from Gray and Larson 2014. As you can see there, we've got a series of tasks and the number of resources were required. And the resource scheduling example, and as you can see in that middle graphic there, you can see the red where we're over allocated activities 2 and 3, and weeks 3 and 4 show some over allocation. And in the resource scheduling example, as you can see here, we've got activities 2 and 3 are float available, and if these activities are scheduled to take place later, then the resource overload can be reduced or avoided. The spare capacity later in the schedule can be utilised. And the resource scheduling example, again by scheduling activities 2 and 3 at the end of the float paths, I'll give them later dates, the resource overload is removed and the project can still be completed according to the original end date. And note, by rescheduling the project, there is now no float in the schedule. All activities are on the critical path. So you run out of float, you can't do any more scheduling, but you know you're as efficient as you can be. So question, what are the impacts of resource scheduling? So resource smoothing or levelling reduces float or slack, reduces flexibility, usually increases the network sensitivity, and resource levelling increases scheduling complexity and can break the sequence of the critical path. And the project may have longer duration, so there needs to be some trade-offs, and that's why I talked about managing stakeholder needs. You know, you may have to go back to your stakeholders, a project sponsor, and explain to them that your project may run over an extra week. But if you've got the information in front of you and your justification, again, it gives you that professional credibility as a project leader, project manager, for justification, and that's key. You know, if you just said it's going to run late because we're not organised, or we're slow, or we're not doing what we're supposed to do, you lose the credibility as well as the workforce. So again, the devil's in the detail, make sure that you're prepared. So, benefits of scheduling resources. Resource utilisation is efficient, and prepare project budget. You have like a time-phased expenditure. It's an important part of the project management plan and the baseline, and facilitates comparison between actual and planned schedule and cost. And it allows you, as I've just touched on, to make informed decisions on resource sharing among projects in a multi-project environment. So you can do various trade-offs, and you can work out when best to use the particular resources to have so it has an impact at programme and portfolio level. So resource levelling, schedule is realistic. There will be no over allocation of resources, so on your Microsoft project you will have no little red figures in your left hand margin. And you'll know how to deal with resource over allocation with time constrained and resource constrained projects. Another strategic pause for you. So resource levelling does not always have a negative impact on the project cost. Do you agree with this statement? So I want you to have a think about this, and I think I touched on it a little bit on the last slide, or last few slides. Do you agree? Okay, so on that Dr. Mike Clayton video, we talked about automated and manual ways of resource smoothing and levelling, and he was very in favour of the manual. There is automated ways to do it. You've got lots of software applications that do this, but again, a lot of students have asked me in the past, particularly when I was teaching computing, why do you show us how to do it manually if the software does it for us? But sometimes I think we're ignorant, aren't we? And we depend so highly on technology and computers. But I think sometimes you've got to look at it in two perspectives. One perspective is if the computers disappear or the network goes down, are you confident that you could figure things out without computers? There is times when I've worked in an organisation where we had no network for 6 weeks, so we had to go back to pen and paper, which was horrific. But if you didn't understand how things worked without the technology and the software and the algorithms, then you're really going to struggle. So we try to find a nice balance on the studying. So that's why in some of your other modules you might have had to do a little bit of manual mathematics and work things out. Okay, so it can be very complicated when there's so many resource types to generate the most efficient resource schedule. So sometimes it's just so complicated. There's so much there going on in your project. And it's commonly done as part of a computer project planning software. So Microsoft Project has, obviously, the primary objective for this module is to get efficient using Microsoft Project. And we have other ones like Primeval, I think Primeval you pronounce it, or similar programs. And results depend on what's called heuristics used to generate the solution. And heuristics, for example, could be the delay activity with the longest float, etc. And in real life, resource availability should be dynamic and requires continual replanning. You know, we can plan at the start of the project, but we know that it should be an ongoing iterative process because people do get sick, people have holidays, equipment breaks, you get delays on other parts, other dependencies have an impact, and it also, so you need to be effective. So a good example might be that you have a particular piece of equipment that's needed at week 7, but on week 5 that piece of equipment has been damaged on a different project, and it may have to go into the maintenance workshop, which has an impact. So you need to plan mitigation, you need to plan how to do it, and is there other jobs that could be done while you're waiting for that piece of equipment to be repaired, for example. So it isn't something you do at the start, you constantly revisit your planning, and a good project manager should be doing this all the time. And that brings us to the end of this session. Hopefully it's recorded this time. But to summarise, we've described the problems of resource scheduling, we've explained the concepts of resource smoothing and levelling, we've explained the benefits of resource scheduling, and what I'd like you to do now is move on to session 9. It's a bit of a stretch and challenge activity, this one. This is for the more capable Microsoft Project users. If you can all do it, fantastic. Our Zoom sessions on Thursday will be great because hopefully you'll all be very confident using the software, but there's a few stingers in there, so this will be a little bit tougher for you, but give it your best shot. We're going to do a little bit more work on the Padlet board, so you may need to create your own account, as I maybe explained earlier, just so that I know who's posting, because in the past when I've used Padlet, students have posted the work, and because they've used it as a guest user, I don't know who's posted the work. So please create an account first and log in before you start using it. In the Zoom session I'll give you a quick tour. But these are the references. It's the same references as the previous 2 week slides, the APM and Larson and Gray. Hopefully you found this session useful. Please continue practicing your Microsoft project, and I will see you all at the Zoom sessions to share and inspire. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all soon.